the woman just turned to her, just turned toward her, and for the first time, her smile kind of just disappeared. And she just said, well, because I remember them,
But
not.
over the following weeks, he began noticing things that absolutely disturbed him. The family was almost never seen during daylight, and whenever one of them entered a room, they immediately closed every door and shutter as soon as they would enter.
And the woman had pale skin like the man. She also had black hair, and it was resting just at her shoulders, but her eyes were strikingly gray.
Exact same spot. There was the man, looking the exact same face, same clothes, same smile.
First, Soren assumed maybe it was the man's son or grandson, and they all just looked alike, someone who just happened to resemble him. And then they reached photographs from the 1970s, and he was still there.
Conversation turned
the 1980s. Relationships, and someone would ask her why she never got close to people, and she would get quiet for a minute, and then she would say something like, well, because watching people grow old and die over and over again, it kind of leaves a hole in your heart.
People.
Sketch.
These people that you just heard were encountered decades apart, all right, without apparently aging one day. I need the elixir, okay? And naturally though, everybody on social media, everybody on TikTok is assuming that they are vampires. But are they? Not everything that doesn't age is a vampire, all right, in these circles, okay? Just because we hear something that sounds immortal, it doesn't mean they are all vampires, all right? And without further ado, let's start with a woman who joined a history tour, all right, in one of America's oldest cities in Florida. But she appeared to remember it as if she was there and not just as somebody who had read about it in history books. Roll tape.
A follower sent me this story after visiting St. Augustine, Florida, and she swears that she may have spent an evening walking around with something that wasn't entirely human. Now, St. Augustine is the oldest city in our nation's history, right? It is the oldest continuously occupied European established city in the United States. Founded in 1565 by the Spanish, it's older than Jamestown and older than Plymouth, and some of its streets have been walked on for nearly 500 years. And according to this viewer, someone there seemed to remember all of it. Now, side note, if you haven't been to St. Augustine, absolutely beautiful. I've been there like 100 times. Recommend that you go. Anyway, she said she was visiting St. Augustine with a group of friends, and she signed up for one of the city's famous history tours, right? They have them all the time. And before the tour started, they stopped at a small martini bar, and it was near the historic district. And while waiting for drinks, she noticed a woman sitting alone. And she said she looked absolutely beautiful, not in like an unusual or like a glamorous way. She just looked timeless, right? She had dark red hair, pale skin, elegant clothes that seemed to look modern but old-fashioned all at the same time. Now, the woman wasn't drinking. She was simply just watching people. Just people watching, whatever. And at one point, the hostess walked over and she made casual conversation with her. And that's when this follower overheard something a little strange. The hostess asked if she was visiting from out of town. And the woman just smiled and she's like, yeah, you could say that. I mean, I haven't been here in a very, very long time. Not uncommon, but the comment seemed normal, of course, at first, but something about the way that she said it really stuck with her. Not like someone who hadn't visited in a few years, more like someone returning after generations. It just had that feel to it. And a little bit later on, she noticed the woman was leaving. And oddly enough, she ended up on the exact same walking tour as this viewer who sent me this story. And the woman, she joined the group by herself, and she stayed near the back, didn't really talk to anybody. And at first, nobody paid much attention to her, right? Until the guide started to talk about the city. And every time that he mentioned, like a historical event or something, the woman quietly would add details that nobody could really know. Not correcting him or being like arrogant in any way, but just adding more validity to what he's saying, right? Little small things that sounded incredibly specific. And when the guide mentioned, a fire that actually destroyed part of the city centuries ago, the woman softly said in the back, yeah, the smoke lingered for days and you can smell it all the way near the bay. And the guy just laughed it off, and he had asked if she read about that somewhere, and she simply just smiled and was like, brush it off. Later, he actually mentioned an old building that no longer exists. And before he could even continue, she just casually added in again. She's like, oh yeah, the balconies were painted blue, and the owner hated the color and complained about it constantly. And several people in the group just laughed, and they were like, oh, okay. But the guide, he started to look a little confused, like who's giving the tour guide here? because apparently that detail wasn't on any plaque or any of the touring information at all. And as the night went on, it got stranger. The woman seemed to know things before the guide would even say them. Names, dates, descriptions, not facts that you'd memorize from a book or, but I'm talking about facts from memories. Like, you could just tell when someone's recounting something from their own memory. Like, she had actually been there before. And eventually they reached an area near some of the oldest streets in the city, and the guide pointed toward a stone structure, and he began to explain its history, of course. And before he could finish, the woman, again, she just quietly whispered, it used to look a little different and whatever. But anyway, my follower happened to be standing beside her at this point, and she asked her, what do you mean? And the woman just stared at the building for a few seconds and said something like, the windows were smaller, and there used to be roses growing along the wall here, and oh my God, it gave it such color. And my follower just laughed, and she's like, how could you possibly know that? And the woman just turned to her, turned toward her, and for the first time, her smile kind of just disappeared, and she just said, because I remember them, not like, I read about them, or I've studied them, I went to Flagler College, or I know. No, she said, I remember them. And the way that she said it sent chills down her spine. And the tour ended sometime around midnight like they normally do, and everyone began heading their separate ways. My follower turned to say goodbye to the woman, but she was already walking away alone through one of the narrow historic side streets. And something made her look back one final time, and the woman had stopped beneath a street lamp and standing completely still under it, just watching the old city go by, like someone returning home after centuries of being away. And then she stepped into the darkness between two of the buildings and vanished from sight. The creepy part? Maybe, but the next morning my follower couldn't stop thinking about this woman. Like, she was just so not she just couldn't explain it. She just was like, oh my God, who is she? So she went online trying to identify some of the details that the woman had mentioned, and according to historical records, the blue balconies, the roses, several of the oddly specific details that she had mentioned were actually very accurate, and details that weren't included on the tour, details that were kind of buried in deep old historical archives. You really would have had to look. So maybe she was a historian, maybe she had spent years studying St. Augustine, maybe she went to Flagler College right there, or maybe some people never really leave the oldest city in America, and every once in a while, they do come back to see how much has really changed. So tell me what you think, historian, or do we have something like the Michelsons arriving back in New Orleans after a couple of 100 years? Let me know what you think.
Florida. When I was listening to that, I forgot that it was Florida and it sounded like Europe. But girl, listen, this is where my mouth will come into business, because you can best believe if I'm on that walking tour, I'm not going to be just hearing this chatter, happening with a woman just saying things that makes it sound like she was there, and I'm not going to turn around and talk to her. What is this? What is this? This is what I mean, man. Separated. This is unity consciousness. We need to unite in using our lips, because my mouth would have been moving. I'll be like, what do you mean? What do you mean? It sounds like you've been here before. What do you mean? What do you mean? What are you saying? The balconies were painted blue? How would you know? She did say that though. You remember it? How do you remember it though? Were you there? Sounds like you're a vampire. Ha ha hee hee. If my mum and I were there, we would have been out here like this. We would have been tag teaming that woman. Right, we would have been literally questioning her, it would have been FBI, letter agencies, that's how it would have seemed. We would have just been on a nice tour, but we would have been questioning, okay? She probably would have thought she was 2 seconds away from getting waterboarded, because I would have been like, what do you mean? Forget the tour. You are the tour. I want to know. Come on now, what would you do? What would you do? Okay, but jokes and outfits aside, because clearly, slightly changed, different day. Anyway. This one doesn't scream vampire to me. I have no idea why it was thought that she was a vampire. There's no blood, there's no feeding, there's no fear of sunlight, there's no weird trope, there's nothing inherently predatory about her. She's on the tour talking about historical fact. She's talking about the colour of the paint, the smell of the flowers, the tiny details, the things. When you're talking to somebody, it's very obvious when somebody's recalling something from memory that they've experienced versus something that they have read in a book or something that they have been told about. Understandably, most people are like, well, vampire, because vampires are the only immortals that walk the earth, and they are the ones that seem to be, they are the only ones that could have potentially lived, all right, for that amount of time decade, like hundreds of years, so they're the ones that would be able to recall something they've seen. But this is what I'm saying, you know, why is it immortality through vampires that we think these are the only beings that are potentially walking the earth? Like, let's have a look. When she was finally asked, how do you remember, or why, like, you know, she says, because I remember them. Oh, girl, you are outing yourself. So what are our options here? A historian with an extraordinary amount of knowledge, somebody remembering a previous life, a spirit connected to that place, a time traveller, more likely to me, a long-lived person returning to a city she once knew. To me, this story feels less vampire, alright, and more like somebody giving a variation of a place that no longer existed that they actually remembered first hand. She speaks like somebody who was returning home, but that home may not have been this particular time. Now, there are theories out there about the timeline of humanity, alright. People do talk about time travelers, alright. People even talk about now CERN messing around and sending people back and messing with the timelines with the machines that they've got. And I personally, I can believe that, alright. I believe that we as humans have the ability through our own consciousness to time travel. We can time travel through our own memories. When you really look at it, alright, time travel is a topic that it could be broader than we think. We think of time travel through movies, but we time travel when we think of memories of the past every day, because technically those events don't exist anymore. They only exist in memory. Now is all that there is. So we are all forms of time travelers, but what we're talking about is somebody who could come back, alright? But it makes me think about what could be done if consciousness and the quantum can be harnessed. But also there are theories about adjacent timelines running alongside ours and people coming back from those timelines, different sects of humanity, if not people that are living alongside humanity already, alright, okay, just out of sync with us, so we don't know how long they live for. We don't even realise that they may be completely different until they open their mouth or show us something, and not to see fangs, until they speak and say things like this. So it makes you wonder. But to me, she sounds like somebody who had lived there before and was coming home. But time traveller, interdimensional, vampire, what do you think? Put your comments. Whoop, my video's gone. Put your comments down below. Welcome back to the third place, alright? It's your girl, and today in this compilation of videos we are going to be looking at a collection of stories about people who appear not to age. I love it. If you've seen Death Becomes Her, watch it again. If you've not seen it, watch it. Here on the third place is where I like to do something slightly different, alright? I don't just want to play you the story and leave you wondering, but what? Or play part 1 and not bother to play part 2, 3 and 4. No, we're going to listen to everything in the story and we are going to assess what do we think is going on here, alright? I want to come back, I want to look at the details, I want to compare the patterns and explore what else might be going on, alright? Now, what gives me the remit to do that? Well, I can. But seriously, if you're new here, my name is Rosie. I'm the face behind the third place, as you can see. And more than that, I'm a mystic. Born this way. Came rolling out of the womb. Veil up, alright? Fully veil up, okay? So I experience reality completely differently. I experience reality through patterns, through symbols, through connections. Most things that other people overlook, I read and see between the lines, alright? I'm constantly in communication in that way. I don't want to just play the stories and move on. I want to look at like what happened. I want to compare the details. I want to ask what else this could be, and I use some of my knowledge and the things that I know to do that, alright? So that doesn't mean I have the complete answers or the complete objective truth, because sometimes there isn't such a thing. But what that does mean is that I'm literally not going to shout automatically out into the void, vampires, and then drop the mic and go home, because like, nah, alright, I want to give you some information if I have any, okay? So that's the remit of this channel, so if you are down for that, strap in. We've got some bad man videos. I was going to say wicked, I've not seen that for years. And we've got some really good videos, some compilations that are coming up in this one, because this is what fascinates me. This is my bread and butter, this is what I do, alright? So I've noticed that every time we hear a story about somebody who never seems to age, like I said before, everybody automatically jumps to the conclusion that they are vampires. And as fun and as exciting as it's sexy that might be, it's just not the case, okay? It is not the case. But what I want to know is why. Why do we jump to that? Half of the stories, all right, that I've heard and that you will hear today, they contain not one mention of blood. Not one iota of a fang, not even a little bit, all right? No coffins. No garlic. No, actually, no, maybe there is a mirror in one, but there's no traditional vampire lore whatsoever that are running through these stories. The only evidence is that somebody hasn't aged, which makes me think, then why are we saying vampire? Now, I understand it's mainly because a lot of people, that's what they know. They're not really used to being in this world talking about the occult, which means the hidden, all these sorts of things. That's why I step in the third place, because I do that stuff, all right? But immortality, all right, or even just people that age unusually slowly, all right, that still doesn't automatically equate to Anne Rice vampire Lestat on the couch. You know, if we're willing to entertain vampires, why would it be crazy to assume that it might be a time traveler? Why would it be crazy to assume that it might be an interdimensional being? Why would it be crazy to assume that it might be the Fae or a long-lived bloodline alongside humanity that is just out of the way? Do you see what I'm trying to say? Why would we not assume it might be somebody moving in and out of our timeline? It might be. So let's look at some other options. Why are we always looking at the neck when maybe we should be looking maybe a bit up or at least sideways? And by sideways, yes, I'm talking about interdimensional beings. Because it might not be as crazy as we think. So in this video, I've gathered 6 stories, all right? I've cherry-picked 6 stories that best represent what I'm trying to say. So before we even dive in, I've got to say that all of the stories today have come from one creator, all right? And I've named his channel, and I absolutely love his channel. I love what he does. So if he ever sees this, hey! I love just people that read these stories, that are interested in these stories, because it comes across when they're doing it. And his name is @MikeyGrim13, and he goes by @GrimHistory. And he's on TikTok, and I'll put his channel screen name up here. I hope I got it right. So please go show some love if you are interested in stories like what you hear and you see, go and subscribe, because it's most definitely worth it, all right? But I had to say that. So I'm using these particular stories because together they raised a question and I couldn't stop thinking about it, all right? I just wanted to know. But going forward, I should say that I'm going to be narrating more of the encounters I find in my own voice, because that's something that I just want to do anyway. But for this collection, I enjoyed the way that he told them, so I'm going to play out the whole version with his voice. And let's dive into the next story.
A viewer named Soren emailed me this story, and if he's telling me the truth, honestly, I don't even know how to explain this one. So Soren has been a wedding photographer for almost 20 years, and he told me that he's photographed hundreds of weddings over his career. And one thing that he always does before meeting a new couple is he looks through old family albums. And he says it kind of helps him recreate meaningful poses and match family traditions. And most of the time, it's just a nice conversation starter. But one wedding changed everything. So the wedding took place at an old family estate in Virginia, and a few weeks before the ceremony, the bride and the groom invited Soren over to look through generations of family wedding photographs, and they had albums dating all the way back to like the 1940s, Soren said. And as he flipped through the first album, nothing seemed unusual or out of the ordinary until one picture caught his attention and made him stop dead in his tracks. Standing several rows behind the bride and the groom was a tall man dressed completely in a black tailored suit. He wasn't smiling, he wasn't talking to anyone, he was simply just staring directly into the camera. Soren joked to the bride, like, who's the serious guy in the back? And the bride just shrugged, and she's like, I really have no idea, but my grandmother always said that he was just some distant family friend, and he was kind of always around. So they kept turning the pages, and they come to another wedding, and another decade. And there he was again, same black suit, same stoic and calm expression, not any older, not any younger, just exactly the same in every single picture. And at first, Soren assumed maybe it was the man's son or grandson and they all just look alike, someone who just happened to resemble him. And then they reached photographs from the 1970s and he was still there. The 1980s, there again. And we get to the 90s and this man is still there, the exact same man looking the exact same way. By now, Soren wasn't really joking anymore, and he laid the album, side by side to compare, and nearly 80 years of weddings, this same man is appearing in every single one of these photographs, and always somewhere in the background, right? Never standing with the family or with the party, never smiling, he's always just there. And the bride noticed Soren had, kind of got a little serious and quiet because, this is definitely, makes you think a little bit. She admitted something that she never really thought about until that moment, and her grandmother refused to really speak about that man. And whenever anybody had asked, who he was, and the grandmother would just simply say, if he comes to the wedding, let him stay. Nothing more, no explanation given, just those words. And the wedding day had finally arrived, and Soren spent hours photographing the guest, and he kept secretly scanning the faces, looking for the mysterious man. He was kind of hoping he was going to see him, but there was nothing. The man wasn't in anywhere. He wasn't appearing anywhere. He was not there. And eventually the ceremony ended and everyone was celebrating, and Soren headed home to edit thousands of photographs. Now, around 2 a.m. the following day, he was reviewing the reception pictures when he froze. Near the back of the dance floor, partially hidden behind a stone column, was the man. The same black suit, same face, same expression from every photograph dating back almost 80 years. The strange part is Soren swears that he never saw him once during the entire wedding. He was actively looking for him. Not while he was taking pictures, not during the dinner, not even while packing up his cameras and getting ready to go home. He immediately called the bride and he told her, look, this man is here. I'm looking at his picture right now. She became silent, and then she asked him to kind of zoom in on it, and as he enlarged the image, they noticed something neither of them had seen before. Every guest around him was laughing and dancing or eating, but they were blurred out from movement. But the man was perfectly sharp, and as if time itself hadn't moved around him. Soren asked her if she wanted him to edit the man out before delivering, the gallery to her, and she answered almost immediately. She's like, no. Leave him exactly where he is. When Soren had asked her why, she told him something that her grandmother had told her years before but didn't really dawn on her. And she said, he's been coming to our family's weddings longer than anyone can remember and longer than a lot of us have been alive. And according to my grandmother, everyone that he watches stays together for life and they have a very happy and healthy life together. Soren says he delivered the photos exactly as they were, and he never heard from that family again. But ever since then, whenever he's photographing a wedding, the very first thing that he does is look through the old family's albums, just to make sure that the man isn't already waiting for them. Let me know what you guys think in the comments.
Tell me if anybody else was picturing Lurch from the Addams Family when you were hearing that. Or like the dude from the Monsters that looks like Frankenstein. Every time I just think about that image, y'all. Every time. Cookie and the cookie, mysterious and spooky. They're all little cookie, the Addams Family. That's like the old school one, I remember that one. So anyway, again, all right, we apparently have an ageless man here, all right, dressed in black, appearing across almost 80 years worth of photographs, weddings, all right. If it was in my family, they'd be seeing nothing because hardly anyone ever gets married. Okay, maybe we were cursed. Probably not vampire for this one, all right, okay. But people may immediately go, tall, a black man who never ages, Morgan Freeman. I know, Morgan, sorry. It's not even a black man, is it? Tall man in black who doesn't age. Vampire. Okay. Alright, but nothing about his behaviour indicates vampire. Alright, it indicates protector, if you ask me. Alright, he isn't attacking anybody, he isn't feeding on anyone, he's not frightening anyone, there's no black shadows being cast over anyone. Alright, he's just attending. I mean, I hope he brought a gift, it's kind of rude. But maybe he is the gift, by what's said at the end of the story, that every single person whose wedding he appeared at has gone on to live a happy, long, healthy marriage. I mean, that is the gift, right? So to me, this feels far more ancestral in certain beliefs and certain, even if they didn't believe it, there are such things as ancestral spirits connected to the family line, or maybe just some beings that are kind of maybe just sort of attached to the family through various different means, not necessarily in a negative way. And it just provides protection, lineage. When you listen to stories about, particularly those in the sort of the Haitian culture, where they're talking about the spirits and the African cultures as well, or the ones where you see people pouring libations and they talk about feeding their ancestral spirits on their altars and things like that. They very much are more in touch with that, especially like in Africa and stuff. They're more in touch with that way of being. In the West, or particularly in places like Europe, or maybe let's just say where I'm from in Britain or in the States, we're so detached from like death and the spirit world, because if you're believing Christianity, if you're a Christian, there's most people are, or religious, it's kind of like, anything that is like after death, if there's a spirit, if there's anything like that, it's demonic or it's not good. So there's so much divorce from people's actual, from that way of being, that it seems supernatural or weird to so many people. That, but for me, it's not. All right. So it's almost like this is a snapshot of what that might look like if we actually had the sight to see. All right. Some people do have the sight. I do have the sight. Okay, I've got the sight. Especially when I'm looking at photographs, but that makes it more. This is why maybe it's more beautiful to me and not spooky, because it feels very protective. Like death is not. It's not nice, but it's not scary. Even spirits afterlife, unless they're doing nonsense, it's more sad than anything, unless they are there protecting you. Okay, so he could be an ancestor, he could be, like I said, a guardian, or even a presence created and strengthened by generations of family, like almost like an egregore of sorts. All right, and an egregore is like a thought form that you know, if a lot of people focus and they can create something, all right, that can become a spirit that can actually do whatever it is taught to do. So in this way, this could be a guardian spirit, an egregore spirit. All right, I can talk about that more in another video, but for now, this is really nice. What do you think? So the grandmother's instructions are very interesting, aren't they? You know, if he comes to the wedding, let him stay. She knew the drop, and I don't know why these elders are not telling the youngers anything, because this is why information is not being passed on. Okay? If a tree in the forest fell, did anyone hear it if you weren't there? No. You need to pass this information on. Witnessing is very important to keep things alive in the grid, all right, or to keep things on specific timelines and to keep information alive. What Grandma said didn't sound like fear, it sounded like knowledge. Maybe she didn't know fully who he is, but at least they had some understanding, all right? So they knew the rule. Do not challenge him, do not remove him, okay? Let him witness the marriage, all right? It's important to witness, okay, in the esoteric. So already we've got two ageless people, and none of them behaves like Dracula or vampires, all right? None of them, okay? One appears connected to the memory of the city, and one appears connected to a family. The next story, however, on the surface, it has nearly every ingredient a classic vampire noir story can ask for. It really does, until you actually listen to the whole story. So we've got an old estate, we've got some beautiful pale strangers, sealed windows, no food, sticky stuff on plates, and people who only seem to emerge after dark. Tick, 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 tick. But then we get to the laboratory, and that's where the vampire explanation team seems too simple. Roll film.
A follower sent me a story that they heard about a cleaner who lived in Sicily and was hired by an impossibly wealthy family living in a remote mountain estate, but they weren't what they seemed. And being as my family is from Sicily, I enjoyed this one a little bit. Now, as always, there's no way for me to verify any of this, so you decide if it's entertainment or if it really happened. Now, this family, they never went outside during the day, there was no food anywhere inside of the house, and the cleaner was warned to pretend that he didn't notice anything. And it supposedly happened to a cleaner named Nicolo who lived in Sicily. Now, Nicolo had spent years cleaning homes throughout the cities and villages near where he lived, and most of his jobs were pretty ordinary. He would be given an address, a list of rooms, and a few instructions to follow, and he would go about his business. But one morning, his boss sent him deep into the mountains to clean a remote house nearly an hour away from his home. And when Nicolo had arrived, the property looked absolutely abandoned. It was a small farmhouse that looked centuries old, with faded walls, antique furniture, and heavy wooded shutters that were covering every window. But the man who had answered the door didn't really belong there, and he introduced himself as Thomas, and Nicolo described him as unusually tall, extremely pale, and almost unnaturally attractive, he said. Like someone who didn't belong there, they looked like they belonged in a fashion advertisement, instead of standing at a isolated farmhouse in the Sicilian mountains. Now, the strangest part was that the house was already spotless. There was no dust anywhere, there was no clutter, no sign that anyone had actually been living there, kind of different from what the outside showed. And still, Thomas handed Nicolo a list and instructed him to clean every floor, bathroom, and surface inside of the home. Several hours later, more people began to arrive, and Nicolo said that they all looked remarkably similar to Thomas. They were tall, pale, thin, and all of them were almost impossibly perfect, and none of them spoke to him at all, and they simply gathered in the living room and they would just watch him work. When Nicolo finished, Thomas told him that they had another property that needed some more cleaning, and Nicolo had asked them, for the address, and Thomas said, "Don't worry, you'll come with us. We will take you." Nicolo refused, and he had no intention of climbing into any vehicle with strangers and disappearing deeper into the mountains. But as he was packing up his equipment, his boss had called him, and he sounded absolutely frightened and unusually serious, the boss. And he told Nicolo that these clients were offering the company an enormous contract, and that if he refused to go with them, he would lose his job and his boss would lose the contract. So Nicolo reluctantly climbed into their SUV, and they drove for nearly 2 hours through isolated mountain roads before arriving at this enormous estate that was hidden among orchards and valleys. And the main house had been built sometime in the 1600s. He could just tell. There was a sign outside that pretty much stated when the estate was built, and that's how we knew. Now, it looked more like a monastery or ancient manor than a private residence. Inside were long hallways, a ceremonial dining room, and more than a dozen bedrooms and heavy wooden shutters that were again covering every single window. And the family offered Nicolo full time work to stay there, and his instructions were pretty simple: clean only the rooms that he was assigned. Never enter the other buildings on the property, never touch anything inside of the room that they would call, or that he would soon come to learn as the laboratory, and never ask any questions. Nicolo, of course, accepted, wanting to keep his job, and the money was too good to refuse. But over the following weeks, he began noticing things that absolutely disturbed him. The family was almost never seen during daylight, and whenever one of them entered a room, they immediately closed every door and shutter as soon as they would enter. And even during the intense Sicilian summer, they wore dark, thick clothing that covered every inch of their bodies. And he described it as like long, thick wool. And in my mind, I pictured it like a herringbone suit type of material. Now, Niccolo never saw them eat. The refrigerators were always empty. The cupboards contained no food. And yet, after certain nights, Niccolo would arrive to find the dining hall filled with dirty plates and long tables set for dozens of guests. But the plates never contained any scraps or morsel whatever of food, only this dark, sticky stains on it. And then there was the laboratory, and it resembled a private medical room with reclining chairs and metal instruments, mirrors, and equipment that Niccolo didn't even recognize. He said it looked very alien-like and foreign to him. And he was ordered to clean the chair and the floor beneath it, but never to touch anything else. Like those, it was very specific. And one afternoon, while cleaning that room, he heard something moving directly above him, and it sounded like heavy knocking mixed with the growl of an animal. But when Niccolo later cleaned the bedrooms upstairs, he found them to be empty. But he knew that there was something up there. And the most frightening incident happened after a large gathering at the estate. Niccolo had arrived late that morning because his mother was actually ill, so he had to go back into town. So Thomas ordered him to remain at the estate several hours after sunset to make up for the time lost. And by 10:30 that night, Niccolo was still cleaning the Great Hall. That was when the family began appearing, and he said they didn't arrive like normal party guests or for like a normal party. He said they just appeared. No vehicles came up the gravel road to to the house. No doors opened, but yet one by one, people began walking into the Great Hall from somewhere deeper within the estate. And of course, there was Thomas, the near 7 foot tall man, and that Niccolo had seen before. There were several women, a few other older men, a few younger men, nearly 20 people in total, and every one of them were pale, elegant, and very silent. Niccolo had already cleaned every room in the house, and he knew that none of them had been inside at that time. So where had they come from? And that was when he remembered the abandoned stables that were behind the manor. Nicolo had noticed that after sunset, people were constantly walking between the house and those buildings outside. The stables had no horses, no windows, no visible electricity, and he had even been strictly forbidden from going anywhere near them. Like that was the one part of the property that he was not allowed to clean or go near whatsoever. Now, Nicolo became convinced that there was something underneath the estate, maybe like an underground section of the property where the family remained during the day, but he never tried to prove it, and he never opened the stable doors or anything. He never searched for another entrance. He simply just cleaned what he was told to clean, and he pretended not to notice anything unusual, like his instructions told him. Now, Nicolo eventually left the job, and he never claimed to have seen, fangs or anything supernatural like that. And he never saw anyone drink anything unusual, and he never witnessed anything that could prove that the family was any type of level of supernatural at all. But he said that after months of working inside that estate, he became certain of one thing, and that was those people were not living like normal human beings. They avoided sunlight, they never ate any food, they appeared only after dark, and somewhere beneath those abandoned stables, the family was hiding something that they were willing to pay a great deal of money to keep a secret. So, Niccolo said the reason he remained safe was simple. He understood the unspoken rule of the house: clean their rooms, keep your eyes lowered, and no matter what you see, pretend you didn't see it. So, let me know what you guys think in the comments. If you've heard about this, if you're from there, or you have family that are from there and you've heard it once before, or if you've heard something similar like this in another part of the country or another part of the world, let me know.
On this one, I'm not going to front. When people say vampire, yeah, I'll be like, okay, yeah. Pale people, yeah. Like, this story was strange, okay? Oh, okay, we're going to let vampire in. We're going to let vampire in as a maybe. But let's not get too sexy on the vampire. Let's not get too sexy on them, all right? Because it is not the only thing. Who else was sitting there thinking, all right? Well, first of all, why employ a cleaner to a house that doesn't even need to be cleaned? To me, that first house seemed like it was a test. It was a test to see how this guy does. Can he keep his mouth? Can he listen to rules? All right. Is he gonna come in and say anything? Is he gonna come in and go like, you don't need me, everything's clean? Or are you gonna just do what you gotta do? It was a test. It was a test. Basically, they saw whether he followed instructions, okay. And only after that did they take him to the big house. Only after that. So it really did, that felt less of a cleaning job and more of an interview, if you ask me. And it's 11:11 as I film as I just said that. All right. Can he do an appellation up in here? If you saw something, no you didn't. If you heard something, no you didn't. Can you do that successfully? In fact, they should just hire somebody from Appalachia because, like, don't need to tell them twice. But then we get to the family themselves. Very vampire coded. Tall, pale, slender, extremely attractive. Just sounds like your average New York supermodel. Hungry. That does sound like vampires, but you know what else that sounds like? Tall Nordic, tall blondes. Nordic extraterrestrials, although I do sometimes think interdimensional, but you know, tall whites, Nordics, even some Pleiadians sound like that. Basically what I'm trying to say is giving interdimensional, because what was the barn about? He wasn't allowed to go into the barn, but yet these people will just appear from the barn. It's giving portal, it's giving doorway to another world. What was down there? We won't know because Nick was a good old worker. But to me, when I heard the story, I was like, it doesn't quite smack of that. All right. What I'm saying is it just seemed like it belongs to more than one body of law. There was the laboratory. Why do a traditional vampire family need a laboratory? To be honest, though, I don't really vibe with vampire law. I do believe there are such things as vampires, but I do believe this could be another way to keep the family alive. It seems that they're always like connected to mansions and old money or something like that. Maybe they're processing blood. Maybe they're processing food. Maybe they're using blood medically rather than hunting in the traditional way. I want to know who was coming to all these dinner parties, man. I would have looked at those plates. Didn't he have to wash them? I don't know. Maybe these beings, though, aren't native to our atmosphere or our environment. All right. Because what I was thinking is that they were saying that they were didn't want to be in the sun. But if you were a being from somewhere else that had pale skin like a tall white, you wouldn't want to be in the sun, all right, because you would be from an environment or at least a dimensional realm that is significantly different to this one. Everything, the sun would feel harsh, the environment, the atmosphere would feel harsh. That doesn't indicate vampire though, does it? Huh? There's many TV programs where they show like pale white beings and they all are the same, they're all like, right? It could simply just mean the environment was not built for them. That's more what I'm leaning towards, if I'm honest. Not to mention beings not from here. Often when we see them depicted in movies, they are hundreds of years old. So it makes sense why they want to live away from the rest of us, because we will notice if these beings that look like that are around for hundreds of years. The stables, all right, no horses, no windows, no visible electricity. People constantly moving between the stables and just appearing. Niccolo becomes convinced there's something inhuman. There is something underneath the property, but he was so good he didn't check. Good for him, because that's why this story got out to tell the tale. Editing Rosie here. Okay, this video actually is by Mikey Grimm as well, and it wasn't supposed to make it into this one. However, as I was just editing and saying about the barn, and, you know, people were talking about perhaps underground cave systems or underground tunnels that we hear about and talk about in the conspiracy circles, it reminded me that I had heard this particular story that is titled Russian Soldiers Battle the Anunnaki. Now, I'm not going to bother to go into the ins and outs of whether I believe the Anunnaki or any of that type of thing. I'm just using it, okay, because it's like, underground cave systems. Reminds me of the movie Cabin in the Woods. Google it if you don't know. It's the theme we're looking at, not the literal like for like. But in this story here, you hear how they describe the Russian soldiers. They went down into these caves. There was extensive tunnels, or there were, I should say, extensive tunnels they were going down, and they came across military with these interdimensional looking beings, incredibly tall, a kind of a suit that looked very exoskeletal, all right? If anybody doesn't know what that is, think Predator, think Xenomorphs, all right? But underneath, when people talk about Anunnaki, they always say that they were very pale, almost albino or albino looking, all right? And then they had this little breakout fight. But that's very interesting because I just wanted to connect the two underground tunnels that connect to God knows where, all right, especially in Europe. And the conspiracy, I should say, or conspiracy theory or conspiracy fact, that there is this hand-in-hand business going on with military or whatever. But I'm putting it in because it's food for thought, okay? What do you think?
When they finally did locate the group, something didn't make sense. And yes, there were armed freedom fighters within these cave networks, but they weren't alone. And standing with them were these figures that he couldn't explain, and he described them as impossibly tall. They were well over 9 feet, maybe closer to 11 feet. They had very, very broad shoulders and long limbs. And their bodies were covered in what he called like a black-like armor that seemed to move like it was alive. And what came to my mind was kind of like Venom. I don't know. But at first, they thought it was like experimental gear or some kind of advanced exoskeleton system, but then one of the figures turned toward them, and even in the dim light of the cave, he could see its face, and it was not human at all. And according to the journal, the fighters, and these beings were gathered around what looked like a map discussing war plans, and it didn't look like a normal map. He described it as a map that seemed to move and shift, like the map was almost alive. And then somebody made noise, and one of the soldiers had shifted their footing just slightly, but in that silence of the cave, it was enough, and every single head in that chamber snapped toward them, and at the exact time, all hell broke loose.
And so it could be an underground base of sorts. Who knows? It could be an entrance to a tunnel system, or it could be a portal to another dimensional realm. It really could be, because they don't arrive normally; they just appear. There's also, I've got to bring in another third way, a strong fey quality to this, to be honest, the way that the people look and the way that they are. Not Victorian fairies, all right, with wings, but the older actual idea of who the fairies are. The good people. There are many different names. Those are just the names we give them on the British Isles. Beautiful otherworldly beings, living not with humanity, but alongside humanity, but frequently they did before coming in and out, all right? Operating under a completely different set of rules. Be careful when you're dealing with the Fae, all right? Do the task. Do not ask questions. Don't enter forbidden rooms. You know what else that sounds like? Mermaid aquatic encounters of people that get taken. This is what I'm saying. That's another story. I talk about that a lot. Myth gives us something, but it's not everything. All right. Niccolo survives because he understands the etiquette of the house. So what were they then? Vampires? Possibly, I'll give that one on this story, all right? An interdimensional group using the house and stables as a base for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years? Maybe. Long-lived human beings using technology to perhaps maintain themselves? Possibly. The Fae wearing modern masks? Maybe. But this story right here, that story right there, is exactly why I didn't want or don't want us to go thinking. Sunlight doesn't like the sunlight and then immediately go a vampire, end of story. Because once you add the laboratory, the test house is what I'm going to call it, and the hidden stables, this becomes much stranger than a simple vampire story, and it gets layered. And I'm here for it. I absolutely love that story. I would love to see what they look like. I'm going to put images of what I imagine they look like in here as well. You know, and I'm so curious. I would love to sit down and kiki with Niccolo. But my man probably won't tell me anything because he's so good. He definitely needs to work for letter agencies. He's got the right stuff. He's got the right stuff, baby. Love the way you turn me on. Or maybe like, love the way you say nothing. Alright, sorry. 80s moment. Neurodivergent moment. Let's dive on to story number 4. A nice little palate cleanser we've got going on here. Because this one is going to be about the fisherman who never aged. Enough said, roll clip.
According to a follower from Croatia, her grandfather spent 40 years fishing with a man who never seemed to age, and to this day, nobody in the family nor her grandfather could ever explain why that was. So this story was sent to me by a follower who I am going to call Katerina, and she told me that this happened to her late grandfather named Luka, and he spent most of his life fishing at the Sava River in Zagreb, Croatia. And according to her, her grandfather had been fishing there pretty much since the time he was 15 years old. The river was his second home, right? He knew every bend, he knew every place that the fish would like to hide out, he knew everything. And over the years, he became friends with dozens of the regular fishermen there. But there was one man that he said stood out from everybody else. And according to Luka, he first met him when they were around the age of 30. And this man was absolutely impossible to forget, he would say. He was unusually tall, very, very well fit, dark hair. He always had a very, very well-kept, neat beard, and he was always well-dressed, even when standing in knee-deep mud beside the river. This guy was always well put together, and Luka would actually joke around with him at how well he always looked. Now, the two quickly became friends. They would fish together for hours on end. They would share sandwiches, drink a beer together, swap stories. And then one day, the man just simply stopped showing up. And Luka had assumed that maybe he'd found another fishing spot, and as always, life went on. And nearly 20 years later, Luka was back at the same stretch of river when someone called out his name, and he turned around, and there stood his old fishing partner, smiling, and as if only maybe a week had passed since he last seen him. The man greeted him warmly and asked, hey, how has life been? But according to Luka, something immediately felt a little off about this, because while nearly 20 years had passed, the man hasn't changed one bit. Not a single gray hair, not one wrinkle on the face, not even a different type of hairstyle. He literally looked exactly the same as he did the day that Luka first met him, and the last day that Luka seen him. Luka laughed and had asked him, where he disappeared to all these years, and the man casually replied and was like, I spent some time in Austria. And that was it. No other explanation, and they fished together for several days after that. Then the man disappeared again, and for nearly 10 years after that, Luka was like, where the heck has this guy gone? He up and goes. And then by this time, Luka was now in his 60s, and his hair had turned completely gray, his face was lined from decades in the sun, and then one morning, while he was out there fishing again, standing in the exact same spot, there was the man, looking the exact same face, same clothes, same smile. Luka joked and had said to him, I've only had one beer, but, you still haven't aged a day. Something's off about this. The man laughed and simply just said, yeah, the sea air, it's been good to me. And again, nothing more was said about that. They spent a few mornings after that day fishing together and catching up on the years past, and then, once again, the man had vanished. 10 more years passed again, and by now Luka was well into his 70s. His health was actually starting to decline a little bit, but he still made time to visit the river whenever he could and whenever he felt up to it. And one morning, while out there fishing, lo and behold, the man showed up again. The exact same. Not older, not heavier, not skinnier, not different in any way. Luka couldn't hide his disbelief anymore, and he smiled and said to the man, this time I even had a beer, so you got to tell me the truth. How have you not changed in all of these years? The man just laughed, picked up one of the fish that they had caught, and he said, eat more fish. That's the secret. Eat more fish. And went about it. And then he changed the subject, and according to Katerina, that was the last time that her grandfather ever saw this man again. Years later, while going through old family photographs, they found one taken that day that Luka caught the largest carp of his life. And it was a catch that he was even featured in one of the local newspapers for. And standing right beside him was that same mysterious fisherman, looking exactly as he had decades earlier. Katerina told me that her grandfather never believed in ghosts or anything supernatural or no like vampires or immortals or nothing like that. But he simply said that there was no explanation for as to why this guy looked the same all these years. And only one question that stayed with her grandfather for the rest of his life was, how do you spend 40 years knowing someone who never grows old and you have to act like it's normal? So I don't know. Tell me what you think. Was this just an incredible coincidence? Did the guy have phenomenal genetics? Or did Luka spend decades fishing with someone who wasn't living by the same rules as the rest of us? Let me know what you guys think in the comments.
Listen, I may have blown up the friendship, but I would have had questions. Because what do you mean I am meeting you decade after decade after decade and you are not aging? And you're just telling me that it was fish. Omega-3. No. I'm not even doing the British polite. No, you gotta tell me, bro. What do you mean that we've been friends for 40 years? And you've not aged a dot, and here I am with aches and pains. Is this Cocoon? Take me onto your ship. Jessica Tandy, who did? Is this Cocoon because we need to be going where you're going, because clearly it ain't the fish. Is it the water? Is this cocoon? Again, Steve Gutenberg, is this cocoon? You know what though, side note, neurodivergent thought coming through. Times have changed so much that you could never have a movie these days where it's like 90% cast are like old people and it's like that they are the stars. Times have changed. I love Cocoon. I love Batteries Not Included. Everyone, oh come on, yeah. But anyway, but in all seriousness, I can't be serious about it. I don't know how Luca did it, because after the first 20 years, maybe you might convince yourself that he's just got good genetics and shit. Maybe you just remembered how he was incorrectly, alright? Maybe the light hit different, fine. But after another 20? Come on now. Come on. How can you not say anything? Every time you came back, man's got same face. I'll be looking at the ears to see whether there are any pulled ears for any kind of like facelift, alright? But you know, they never really look that great on guys, but anyway. At some point, even my British politeness, okay, or Croatian politeness, as the story goes, had to leave the building. Exit stage left, all right, because we have to ask who are you and where do you come from and how do we achieve such, all right? But what interests me most about this is not only that he didn't age, all right, it's that he disappears for long periods of time and then returns as if no time has passed. Actually, no, the best part for me was the end, where there was a really old picture and there he was just cropped up in the back. Man just casually walks back in the picture like a bad baby father, all right, who abandoned their children, all right. Walks back in as if not a care in the world. Sorry not to offend all those people out there. Anyway, all right. But this makes me wonder, all right, whether it is actually a vampire or whether it's immortality, but it's not in the traditional sense of immortality, right? Because perhaps he's not continuously living through all of those 40 years at all. Maybe he's just moving in and out of Luca's timeline. Maybe time passes differently. Maybe for Luca 20 years has genuinely passed, all right, but for the fisherman it's genuinely been only a few weeks or months, like when you listen to those stories about people being kidnapped by mermaids, etc. And they go and they come back and they're like, bro, I've only been gone for like a day. And it's like, no, you've been gone for 8 months. Or like, oh no, you've been gone for 7 years. Like, if he's from another dimensional space, you know, maybe that's the case. Cocoon, all right? Apparently they went to a country place that they never aged, all right? I don't know whether they would age. They would age, I think, if they stayed here, perhaps. I'm not sure. But he repeatedly appeared at that same stretch of water. The river may not, the reason I'm saying that is because the river may simply not be where they happen to fish, all right? It may be the fixed coordinate where their timelines overlap. He could be connected to the water, all right? Maybe he's one of the beings that are using water as a vortex, as a thoroughway, all right? It's not unheard of, okay? If anybody saw the viral story of the woman that walked into the water holding the fish, people were like, she's a siren, a mermaid, was she? Or was she just using the water as a way of passage? Was she fixed to the coordinates of that land? So dude potentially could be like a form of a time traveller, who knows? I'm just throwing options out here. He could be an interdimensional being. He could be a person from a future timeline of humanity, all right? He could be some kind of a river, all right, some kind of guardian, and he could be actually lineage guardian to the family, very much like the other story, all right? To me, this one feels like the least vampire-coded story. Or he also could just be simply just a very kooky old man with a strong penchant for omega-3. But bruh, don't give me any of that. Let us cross that river, build a bridge, all right, because we are going over to the next story. Okay, unlike the fisherman, the woman in the next story, all right, this story, I think it's story 5 now, all right, is cold to the touch, does not appear to age, comes from an entire family that jokes about being vampires, or hybrids at least, okay, and apparently, like Miss St. Augustine out here, has memories that seem to reach far beyond her own lifetime. Sounds like Joan Rivers when she was alive, if you ask me. Joan, do not slap me from beyond the grave. You know I'm sensitive. All right, don't slap me from beyond the grave, but please do come and have a key. Oh my God, as I'm saying all that, all of my technology's just gone. My phone just swung. My microphone just decided to like almost just collapse. Joan, I mean it. I didn't mean it, or did you accept the joke? Let's get into it, all right? Because this is a strange but a goodie, so roll film.
One of the strangest stories that's ever been sent to me, or I think one of the coolest, came from this woman who swears that their best friend isn't entirely human. Now, before you roll your eyes, the person who sent this story to me said that they've known this woman for years, long enough to notice that things don't really make sense or add up with her, kind of. Now, for starters, she doesn't age, like, at all, or at least not in the sense like how all of us do. Photos from over a decade ago look almost identical to how she looks today. Not a day younger, not a day older, just exactly the same. Her family jokes about it almost on the reg, right? They call themselves hybrids, sometimes they call themselves vampires, sometimes they call themselves something else. And everyone just kind of laughs it off because it's not the friend that, doesn't age. The whole family doesn't age, but I'm really talking about the friend right now. So, according to the person who sent this story to me, the jokes always feel very specific, and especially because her mother, her grandmother, and all of her aunts were all rumored to have practiced witchcraft, like serious witchcraft, none of that Pinterest witchcraft. And then there was her father, or rather, the lack of one. And the sender claims that they tried searching public records and census documents out of curiosity one day for him, and there's nothing. There's no trace of him, and it's as if the man appeared out of nowhere, started a family, and then just vanished. But that's not the part that really bothered them. The thing that got them was how she would talk about things, right? She could sit down and describe events from centuries ago in incredible detail, as if she herself was there to witness them, like a female version of, Saint Germain. And not the kind of detail that you get from, like a documentary or reading like a history book. I'm talking about the kind of detail that it sounded very personal, and like you could tell there's like feeling behind it, and like she was remembering it. And whenever someone would ask her, how she knew so much, she'd just laugh and just say like, oh, I watch a lot of educational programs. But according to the sender, it never sounded rehearsed. It always sounded like lived. Like I feel like you could always tell the difference in that. I don't know, that's just me. And then there was something that she said one night that really made this even more believable. The conversation turned to relationships, and someone would ask her why she never got close to people, and she would get quiet for a minute, and then she would say something like, well, because watching people grow old and die over and over again, it kind of leaves a hole in your heart. Sketch. Well, the room went absolutely silent, of course, and someone pointed out that she was really only in her 30s. She immediately corrected herself and claimed that she meant friends she'd lost to violence, right? But later, the sender looked up some of the names that she'd mentioned before, and most had passed of old age, and some didn't seem to exist at all. So on one hand, she's telling them that, oh, they died from violence, but in reality, they died of old age. And over time, they noticed other things. She was always cold to the touch, even during brutal summer heat. And her family moved every single year, never staying in one place. And despite being, the sweetest person that they'd ever met, her only brothers were terrified of making her angry. And when they were, when someone would ask why, one of them supposedly said, because if she ever loses control, someone will die. And the sender says that they still talk to her to this very day. And, she's still very kind, and she's very calm, still looks exactly the same, right? Still hasn't aged. And whenever they ask her questions about her past, she smiles and quickly changes the subject and wants nothing to do with it. And she acts like she has absolutely nothing to hide from anyone. But according to the sender, the longer that they've known her, the more they're convinced that she's hiding something that's been alive a lot longer than anyone realizes, or that she's leading anyone on to believe. So I don't know, let me know what you guys think in the comments.
Okay, so now that we've listened to that story, what do you think? Because now this one, yeah, okay, we're going to allow the vampire again into the room. We're going to allow the vampire theme into the room, because the story gives us much more to work with when it comes to that type of theme, all right? So she doesn't age. Again, family appears to age unusually slow. The skin is gold. The family is constantly moving. To me, that is more of a red flag than anything. She speaks about historical events with the emotion, like we were saying, of the other lady, of somebody who's remembering them, not just reading about them, studying them, heard about them, reciting them. She accidentally talks about how watching people grow old and die over and over again sucks. I mean, that is the trope of vampirism. To be honest, being an Axis Mundi like I am as well, feels like that, where you're like, oh, nobody else understands, nobody else sees life the way that you do. But this is the trope, but this is the key, and her own brothers even are supposedly frightened of what might happen if she loses control. See, that gave me pause for thought. I was like, oh, it's therapy. Are we dealing with a vampire, or are we dealing with an undiagnosed cluster B personality disorder? Because I don't know. Alright, ow. But that was weird. Oh, that was a weird one. Oh God, I keep thinking of the movie Orphan. Oh, but they said she was sweet. God, they should have checked. Did she have a scarf? Like, don't know. But this was more vampire coded, all right, okay. And but even here though, I'm not sure vampire tells everything. Like, I don't know. It's still giving, like, to me, it's still giving people that just live a long time, maybe like Maybe they aren't human, but they're not necessarily vampire. You know, so they have to move. I don't know why Brother's trying to out business like that. Maybe they're half brothers. I don't know. Maybe there's like a bloodline struggle. Vampire Diaries style, but like there's something. Would you joke about it if that's what you were? But then again, that's the greatest red herring. Joking about something you are to throw people off the scent. I don't know. But the whole family being in this element is quite important if you ask me, because it's not just an individual that was bitten in an alleyway and stopped aging, all right? She didn't get to a club and made a bad decision. Bloodlines, okay? Given that castle in Spain, in Italy. So it sounds like something inherited, it sounds like lineage. Potentially something running through the women, because the bros were not feeling it. They weren't feeling it, they were trying to out the bitch. Okay, I shouldn't say that. All right, there's a mysterious father, a man who apparently appears and starts a family and then leaves without a trace within public records. I remember that program from childhood. Would you like to wish on a star? It was a kids program and the dad was an alien, so he effed off, and the mother was left, and Evie had the powers where she could freeze time by doing this and do this to stop unfreeze time, all right? So absent father doesn't mean deadbeat, it could mean alien or vampire. It could. Stranger things have happened. So anyway, what do you think? If the story is accurate, it could suggest that somebody's using another identity, all right? It could suggest an absent or hidden bloodline, as we were talking about before. Or it could also suggest that the father was not living an ordinary human life at all, because he wasn't an ordinary human. Historical memories also give us another possibility, all right? And that being that perhaps she carries the memories that are ancestral. Reincarnation, perhaps, shared through the family, because those aren't the same thing, all right? Somebody that's actually just remembering a past life might actually sound ancient, okay, without their current body actually being ancient. And this is something I talk about with consciousness, because I believe that people are going through an awakening. And when people start to remember things, this is my personal belief with things like past life, and they're like, some people, I've had friends saying, why do some people remember things and not others? And I say that I think everybody's waking up at a different rate, all right? And I believe that past lives are all lives that are probably happening concurrently. It's not necessarily the past, the present, the future. That's just how we frame things. Kind of understanding that perhaps, you know, if everything is in the now, it would mean that maybe everything has happened concurrently. But for some reasons, the way that we perceive things, it's almost as if it's happened in the past. That's just one theory that I'm running with. And when I say that, what I mean by that is that when people remember things, it's that you are remembering all aspects of your soul and all of the fragments and the different lives that they are experiencing. I believe that I'm living a multitude of lives right now that are being on different timelines and different universal planes or dimensional spaces, as well as, you know what I mean? All different versions of my soul, myself, having these different experiences. And as we expand in consciousness, as the veil thins and the walls thin between consciousness, we start to remember all that is. Maybe there'll be a point where we're remembering every single life that we're experiencing concurrently without it interfering with the current life that we are leading, because we would be at an evolutionary point in consciousness where it won't throw us off. It will just be a part of the returning to all that is unity consciousness, as we see these high dimensional beings that seem to have vast information and they seem to be about things. Maybe that's where we're headed, all right? So you might actually be able to do that. So the yearly, moving on from that, so the yearly move for them make practical sense, because you cannot be staying in the same place if you are not aging normally. You cannot remain in one neighbourhood for 20 years looking exactly the same without people noticing. This isn't a soap. It is not a novella. Okay, because if you move every year, new people simply just have to accept you at the age that you appear to be, all right? There's no alarm bells attached to a youthful face. Nobody meets a woman who looks 30 and asks her to prove she was also not 30 in 1982. Okay, so yeah, this could be a vampire star family. I mean, it could be, all right, but it could also be along the bloodline. That's the point that I want to make, okay? Hybrid lineage, there could be inherited memory, or there could be something else entirely going on. But we're going to let the vampire theory in the back door here. We're going to let the semi-right one in, all right? And I say that for conversational sake, because I'm not letting shit in, all right? Boundary salts. For conversation, we're going to let the semi-right one in, all right? Because it simply does not allow the vampire theory but it just simply doesn't allow the vampire theory to sit alone, if you ask me, all right? Now we are coming to the finale. We're coming to the final story in the entire collection. I hope you enjoyed it so far. Please let me know if you're enjoying this. Please don't forget to like and subscribe so that you'll be seeing more videos from like this coming up, because this is my genre and everything like that. So please leave a comment below as well as to what you liked and even what you didn't like. So, you know, I can help make this interesting place for you, all right, and a place that you actually would like to come, find community, listen, and just be yourself and not worry about liking weirdo things. You know, as you can see, I am saying some quite out there things, and it's taken me a while to do that, but that's why I want it to be a safe space for everybody who is interested in this stuff, all right? Okay, let us come on to the final story, all right? Now, this is kind of my favourite story, and it's not because it's scary at all, actually. It's got, like, history, it's got gothic charm, old school music. It's just, well, you'll hear for yourself. But guys, I am running on 5%. Am I going to get this video done? It will be a miracle, y'all. Please let my battery have eternal life right now, okay? Let's roll.
A musician sent me this story about his grandfather, and according to him, his grandfather spent the last years of his life absolutely convinced that he had met the same mysterious couple twice, nearly 50 years apart, and they hadn't aged a single day. So this is for entertainment purposes only, so enjoy. Now, this viewer, he explained that his grandfather was a blues and jazz guitarist who spent most of the 50s and the 60s traveling through Louisiana, Georgia, and South Carolina playing wherever people would pay him, right? Small clubs, private dinners, certain events, historic hotels, old plantation homes. And he wasn't famous or anything like that, but he was talented enough that wealthy people occasionally hired him to play at their intimate gatherings, we'll call them. Now, on this one night in the summer of 1959, he was invited to perform at a private dinner that was, it was this party that was right outside of Savannah. He said it was maybe 25 minutes away, and the estate itself was absolutely beautiful, but he said it felt strange, right? The house looked as if it had been frozen in time for years. There was no televisions, no modern artwork, no bright lights. Everything was illuminated by candles and chandeliers. Really, really old school. And according to him, the guest felt somewhat out of place, is how his grandfather described them. Their clothes looked really expensive, but very dated at the same time. Not costumes, I mean, maybe could have been, but just very older fashioned, worn, like they had gone out of style type of deal. Now, but among all the guests was this one couple that really stood out, and they appeared to be in their mid-30s. The man was of average build, clean-shaven with dark hair that was slicked back, and the woman had pale skin like the man. She also had black hair, and it was resting just at her shoulders, but her eyes were strikingly gray. And throughout the evening, they barely ate, and they never touched the wine that had been poured for everybody. And, you know, whenever his grandfather looked up while playing, he noticed that they were watching him very intently, not in like an uncomfortable way, more like they were enjoying him, right? They were mesmerized by his talent. And after his final song, the couple had approached him, and the woman, she complimented his playing and his talents, and, you know, she told him that she hadn't heard blues performed like that in decades. And the grandfather just kind of laughed it off, and he's like, well, you know, that's because blues changes every year, right? Music does. And she smiled, and she politely replied, and she's like, you know, some things shouldn't change. And the man had asked him, you know, if he ever worried about growing old and losing his ability to play and being forgotten about. And his grandfather joked and, you know, said that musicians get old all the time, and that's just how life is. Now, the woman, she tilted her head in like almost like a confused way, as if like aging itself was something that she'd only read about, right? Like it was foreign to her. And before they left, the man handed him a small silver lighter that was engraved with roses, and he thanked them, and he never thought much about it again. Now, of course, life moved on. He married, had children, had grandchildren, lost some friends, watched entire neighborhoods change over time, and he stopped touring. And eventually he retired, right? Well, then now in 2008, nearly 50 years later, his son convinced him to attend a jazz festival, in Charleston. And during a break between performances, he stepped into a small wine bar that was nearby, and sitting near a window overlooking the street was that same couple, exactly the same way that he saw them nearly 50 years ago. Same dark hair, same gray eyes, same pale skin, and that same elegant clothing. You know, not older, not heavier, they didn't look wrinkled, nothing. They looked the exact same. And at first he assumed, you know, he was mistaken, until the woman looked up and she smiled at him, and she's like, hey, you know, I was hoping that we'd get to hear you play again someday. And he felt his stomach drop because it confirmed what he was already thinking, and he recognized her voice, and he knew that it was her. And the man that was with her, you know, he stood up and he shook his hand. You know, it was firm and cold, and just as he remembered from the first time. And his grandfather finally asked the question that he'd been thinking. He's like, you know, how old are you people? And the woman, she just laughed and then looked toward the stage where musicians were beginning to play again, and she just simply said, you know, we're old enough to know that good music survives everything. You know, wars, floods, cities, families, people. But music, you know, music has a way of refusing to die. And I firmly agree with that, side note. But anyway, a friend of the old man called out for him, and he ended up excusing himself, and he got up and went and spoke. And about 2 minutes later, when he went to go back to the couple, they were gone. There was no sign of them at all. And after that, he had spent years trying to explain what had happened. And maybe, maybe they were descendants, maybe they were siblings, maybe, his memory wasn't as good as he thought it was. But according to the grandson, until the day that he died, his grandfather kept that silver lighter with him almost at all times. And he began to call it like his good luck charm. And every once in a while, he'd hold it in his hands and kind of just like smile to himself, and he'd say to the family, I don't know if they were vampires or what, but whatever they were, they certainly weren't living life the same way that the rest of us were. So I don't know. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Was this just entertainment that was sent to me? Is this the memory of an old man, or a real life case of the movie Sinners with Stack and the girl at the end of the movie?
I love that story. What did you think of that story? I genuinely actually love it. I love the vibe of the whole story, okay? It feels like a film, an old estate outside Savannah, candlelight, musicians playing in dimly lit clubs, a beautifully dressed couple that seem like they're coming in from some sort of bygone era, all right, stepping out of time. And then nearly 50 years later, the same couple appearing again. The same faces, the same voices, the same clothes, the same handshakes. And the first thing the lady said when he was like, nah, can't be, it was like, we thought we'd love to hear you again. Listen, this couple don't care. They don't care. They're not trying to hide. They're not trying to hide who they are, clearly. I think it's almost a case of, well, they knew they could disappear, right? So it's like, they probably live long enough to not even give a shit, and they've got each other. All right, that's what makes this one so different, all right? They don't seem interested in, even if this was a vampire story, they're not interested in feeding off of him. They seem interested in the music. The music is what seems to move them. When they met him, they asked whether he worried about, growing old and losing his ability to play, and he answers just like anyone else of us would. He's like, well, people age, musicians age, that's life, That was the weird, actually. She reacts as though aging was something that she understood intellectually rather than personally. But it said that she seemed puzzled, which made me feel puzzled. And that, to be honest, is what made me think, now she's acting like somebody that's not from here, that's trying to understand the concept of aging, rather than somebody that's lived alongside us that just hasn't aged. Did you not think that? Because that's exactly how it felt to me. All right. Personally, I feel like these, again, are time travelers or something of sorts like that. I'm not getting vampire, but I'm getting people that have aged. I don't know who they are or what they are, but that bit is what I thought. Because an ageless person doesn't look ageless when you just meet them. They just look wherever they are, whatever age that they are, okay? The problem arises and the anomaly becomes visible when somebody meets them twice, 3 times, 4 times, 10, 20, 40, 80 years apart, or something like that. That's when it becomes a problem. So to everybody else, the musical couple are just like a couple sitting in a bar, maybe dressed a bit strangely, but there's nothing else standing out, just an elegant man and woman sitting in a bar. But to the guitarist, they are the same people that he met in 1959, in 1999, all right, which to people today feels ancient, but that's a hell of a long time to be looking the same, all right, and to there be no explanation. And that is the vulnerability of somebody who doesn't age, vampire or not. Continuity, long-term friendship, returning to the same place, being remembered. It's the crux. Well, wouldn't you know, my phone decided to F up, and so the end of this audio, the end of this video is going to have to be a voiceover. They need to move frequently, change names, avoid remaining close, and that's part of the trip we see in vampire things. All right, maybe it more is the fact that, it's not so much, it is everybody dying, but it's the fact that you can't actively stay somewhere too long. They did say that in Into Vampire, did they? So there may never be, there isn't a dramatic paper trail. We may never know, because there is no coffin, there is no castle. Well, not in every case, all right, but there is no evidence beyond the memory of somebody like the people in this story who were fortunate or unfortunate, depending how you look at it, to catch them more than once, So this particular story could feel like the Fae as well. In older folklore, otherworldly beings are often drawn to exceptional musicians, artists and dancers. All right, we always hear stories about the Fae being intertwined with music, okay? They appreciate beauty and they reward talent, all right? They offer strange gifts and they seem to exist outside of normal time. all right? So let's not forget that this dude was giving a lighter. So is the silver lighter just a gift, or is it a token? Is it a small piece of physical proof connecting these two encounters? I don't know, man. I don't know. Ways of adapting to air quotes time. We won't know. But we must know that an immortal only looks immortal to somebody who's long enough to catch them. And that's probably why these stories are so hard to prove or disprove. All right. So after listening to all of those stories and my ramble, all right, what strikes me is that they're not talking about one type of being. Like I've said that from the start. They all contain some form of apparent agelessness or unusual relationship with time though. But their behaviours and the atmosphere and the emotional signature of each and every story, apart from Augustine and the friend, I guess, are completely different. So that we've got the woman in St. Augustine who feels connected to the memory and the place. The Sicilian family that feels secretive. There's technological situations, interdimensional things, and possibly fae going on. We've got the fisherman who feels as though he steps in and out of time. The ageless woman who feels like she's lived long, or at least there's some sort of hybrid lineage going on, and yeah, is a bit vampire coded. And then we've got the musical couple who also feel like that, but you know, they seem to have outlived generations and become attached to the art, because maybe art and music remember what people can't. Plus they've got each other. So we may be placing very different phenomena into one familiar cultural box, simply because vampire is just the nearest word that we've had available to us, especially through pop culture, all right? Because before, concepts such as time travel, dimensional overlap, altered biology, or non-human intelligence, okay, were part of ordinary. They weren't part of ordinary language, all right? What would you say for that? What would you say as somebody who saw something strange hundreds of years ago? All right, what words did people have for somebody who didn't age? You know, vampire, witch, fae, demon, as we always know, immortal. So different names from different cultures were perhaps attempting to describe experiences that didn't fit the accepted rules of reality, right? Now, that doesn't mean that every strange story is true, or okay, but it does not mean that everybody with good skin is secretly 400 years old either. All right. Also, let's not be interrogating every person with well moisturized ankles and facial features at Tesco's. Well, I probably would ask what their skincare routine is anyway. All right, glass skin hashtag. But anyway, it doesn't mean that vampire though should be the end. But basically, what I'm saying is vampire does not have to be the end of the conversation. It shouldn't be. It really shouldn't be. All right, we're conscious beings and we should really be exploring. So it should really be the beginning of the question, if you ask me. What if some of these people are ancestors? What if some are spirits of place? What if some are fae? What if some move through time differently? What if some are interdimensional? What if some belong to long-lived bloodlines? And yeah, what if some actually are those beings that inspired the vampire stories in the first place? All right, are these the people that inspired fiction? I don't have the complete answer, but this was the third place. We are here to flatten the mystery, all right? No, we are not here to flatten the mystery. We are here to look at the details, follow the patterns, and ask what else might be possible. So let me know what you guys think, or what was your favorite? Which one felt the most believable? What do you think these people actually were? That's what I really want to know. I really, really, really want to know. All right. And again, please go and show at Mikey Grimm 13 at Grimmed History over on TikTok some love. You saw all his information all over the screen. I'll also put it in the description box. And if you enjoyed this kind of compilation, where we don't just play the stories, all right, but we pull them apart, please don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and leave a comment. I love to read your comments, all right, because it really does help the third place and your girl here to grow. So until the next time, see you later, and keep being weird. Never stop being weird. Bye. Maybe they were simply just like long-lived beings, all right, who had to learn